911, what's your emergency?
We have an intruder in the house next door. The intruder was in the bedroom with a hammer. The woman who lives there thinks she may have strangled him. He was down when she left.
Can you put her on the phone?
She's bleeding.
Does she need an ambulance?
No, she's a nurse. She says call an ambulance for the guy, he may be dead.
The voice you're hearing is from a Portland 911 call on September 6th, 2006. A 51-year-old emergency room nurse named Susan Kuhnhausen had just strangled her would-be killer with her bare hands. But here's the twist that shocked the world. The man who hired this hitman, the man who wanted Susan dead, was her own husband of almost 18 years. Just 1 hour earlier, Susan had been sitting in Perfect Look Hair Salon, reading a poem in Oprah magazine. "I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear." She had no idea that at that very moment, a 59-year-old career criminal with a near-lethal dose of cocaine in his system was waiting in her bedroom with a claw hammer, paid $50,000 to murder her. How does an 18-year marriage that began with over 100 hours of phone conversations turn into a brutal murder-for-hire plot? And how does a 5'4" nurse with 2 bad knees strangle a 5'9", 190-pound violent felon who had killed before? What happened in that Portland home wasn't just self-defense. It was the ultimate reversal of a carefully planned conspiracy that would expose the deadly reality of domestic violence. Before we dive into Susan's incredible story, I want you to think about this. How well do you really know the person you're closest to? After 18 years of marriage, Susan had no idea her husband was capable of hiring someone to kill her. Comment below. Have you ever discovered something shocking about someone you thought you knew completely? Your experiences might help other viewers recognize when someone they love might be hiding a dark side. If stories like Susan's prove that survival is possible, even in the darkest moments, hit that subscribe button right now. This is the story of Susan Kuhnhausen, the nurse who refused to die. Susan Kuhnhausen wasn't supposed to be a hero. Born in 1955, she grew up in an Air Force family with a cook father and homemaker mother who divorced when Susan was in 2nd grade. Life was chaotic as the children moved from Colorado to Arizona, California, and Nevada, shuffling between schools, homes,
Despite her
and parents.
unstable childhood,
Susan was drawn to helping others. She became first a licensed practical nurse, then earned her registered nurse degree. In the early 1980s, she moved to Oregon, settling first in Coos Bay and later Portland. By the mid-1980s, Susan had found her calling at Providence Portland Medical Center, working in the emergency room where she'd spend nearly 30 years. She was the kind of nurse you'd want in a crisis. Most crucially, for her future survival, Susan and all Providence nurses trained regularly in self-defense, learning how to slip out of headlocks and escape dangerous situations. Will I ever remember this stuff? Susan often wondered during training. She was about to find out. Colleagues described Susan as outgoing and vivacious, with loud, boisterous laughs. She'd sit in the front row at Harvey's Comedy Club and wasn't afraid to engage with performers. But by 1988, at age 33, she was single and ready to find love. In 1988, Susan's friend and mother decided to help her find romance. They paid for a personal ad in Portland's Willamette Week. Someone different, 33, overweight but not over life, who wants more out of a relationship than just slender. Among the many responses was one from Mike Kuhnhausen. "Hi, different. My name is Mike. I'm 39 and I enjoy most things in nature." On January 30th, 1988, Susan spoke with Mike by phone for the first time. She was so impressed that she marked the date in her kitten-themed daybook with a red, smiley face. What followed was an intense courtship conducted largely over the phone. Susan estimates they talked for over 100 hours before meeting. Susan remembered that he had a nice voice, and their first date in February 1988, and within a year, they were driving to Reno to get married. Mike liked to gamble, and Susan figured there was no bigger gamble in life than marriage. The problems started almost immediately after the wedding. It wasn't very long after we got married, Susan recalled, that there was no more hiking, no more getting out. The romantic nature lover vanished, replaced by someone with a grim world view. Mike grew up in Portland, adopted as a newborn in 1948. He told Susan he saw combat in Vietnam, but military records listed him as a switchboard operator. Within a few years of their wedding, he got a job as janitorial supervisor for Oregon Entertainment, the parent company of Fantasy Adult Video, the workplace where he would eventually meet his future accomplice. The couple never had children, which was fine with Susan, but Mike grew increasingly controlling. He chain-smoked while guzzling Diet Cokes and hounded Susan about her plans when she went out. He watched her spending and complained about minor purchases. At what point do you think Susan should have recognized these red flags? Was it the personality change after marriage? The deliberate rejection of affection? The controlling behavior of money and her activities? Comment your thoughts below, because what you're about to hear gets much darker, and I want to know where you would draw the line. As the marriage deteriorated over 17 years, Susan's colleagues at Providence began noticing changes. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and seemed to carry an invisible burden.
By 2005, after 17 years of marriage, Susan had finally reached her breaking point. "I cared about him, but I didn't want to live with him anymore," she later explained. "I wanted to be happy again." In September 2005, Susan made the difficult decision to separate from Mike. She kicked him out of their Montevilla neighborhood home, a blue, one-story Cape Cod with a gray picket fence. Mike moved into his father's home. But Susan made critical mistakes that would nearly cost her life. She never changed the locks, and she never changed the security system code, 1210, their wedding anniversary date of December 10th. The separation wasn't the end Mike had hoped for. By 2006, it was clear Susan wasn't coming back. She had started divorce proceedings, and Mike realized his marriage was truly over. Mike's situation had become desperate by 2006. He'd lost his job at Fantasy Adult Video weeks before planning Susan's murder. He had no steady income, no permanent housing, and was living with his father. Most importantly, Mike faced significant financial losses from the divorce. Susan had been the primary breadwinner throughout their marriage, and she'd already removed Mike as beneficiary on her life insurance policy, naming her brother instead. But there was still one major asset, their paid-off Montevilla house worth about $300,000. If Susan died before the divorce was finalized, Mike would likely inherit everything as her surviving spouse. Mike's search for a hitman led him to Edward Dalton Haffey, a 59-year-old custodian at Fantasy Adult Video with a horrifying criminal history. Haffey wasn't just any criminal, he was a convicted murderer who had previously arranged the killing of his own ex-girlfriend. On February 28, 1991, Haffey had arranged the murder of 39-year-old Georgia Lee Dutton. Her decomposed body was later found along the Umpqua River near Roseburg. Haffey pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated murder on March 14, 1994, and spent 9 years in Eastern Oregon Correctional Institution. Released on November 3, 2003, Haffey moved to Portland and needed work. In July 2004, Mike hired him to clean floors at Fantasy Adult Video. Over months of working together, the two men developed a relationship that would turn deadly. When Mike approached Haffey with his murder proposition, Haffey didn't need much convincing. The offered payment was $50,000, more money than Haffey could earn in several years of custodial work. More importantly, having killed before, Haffey was willing to kill again. Court records would later reveal that Mike had approached at least 2 other people before finding Haffey. One witness told police that Mike had met with him and Haffey, offering $5,000 if he helped kill Susan. Another witness had driven Haffey to meet a bald man in an Applebee's parking lot, later identified as Mike. The planning took several weeks. Mike provided detailed information about Susan's routines, work schedule, and home security system. Most crucially, he gave Haffey the security code, that anniversary date Susan had never changed. Mike's alibi was carefully constructed. On September 6, 2006, he drove his gold Dodge Neon to the Oregon coast, checking into the Lincoln City Inn with his credit card that afternoon. He left Susan a note by the microwave: "Sue, haven't been sleeping. Had to get away, went to the beach. Love, me." But Haffey made a crucial error that would doom the entire plot. An autopsy would later reveal he had consumed a near-lethal dose of cocaine before entering Susan's house. The drug made him erratic, paranoid, and unable to think clearly. This is where the story takes a turn that will make your heart pound. What I'm about to tell you about Susan's fight for survival will show you exactly what 30 years of emergency room training can do when someone's life depends on it. But first, I need to ask, what do you think you would do if you came home to find a stranger with a weapon waiting to kill you? Because Susan's response shocked everyone, including the killer himself. Before we get to the most intense part of Susan's story, if you're amazed by her strength and want to see more incredible survival stories, smash that subscribe button. Susan ended her shift at Providence Portland Medical Center and headed to Perfect Look Hair Salon on East Burnside Street. At 6:37 p.m., Susan arrived at her Blue Cape Cod home in the Montevilla neighborhood. She found Mike's note, disarmed her security system using code 1210, and walked through the house to check the front door. She went outside to flip through her mail in the warm evening air. When Susan came back inside and kicked off her Birkenstocks, she noticed how dark her bedroom was. Had she forgotten to open the curtains that morning? Suddenly, from behind the bedroom door, a man lurched toward her. At 5'9", the 59-year-old Edward Haffey weighed 190 pounds. He wore Dockers, a blue-striped shirt, and a tan baseball hat pulled low over his eyes. His long hair was in a ponytail tucked into the cap. He wore yellow rubber gloves and carried a red and black claw hammer. One minute you think you're a regular person in the world, Susan would later reflect, and then you're not. For most people, finding an armed intruder would trigger flight. But Susan wasn't most people. Her 30 years of emergency room experience kicked in immediately. When Haffey attacked, Susan's training took over. She crowded him, knowing his hammer swings would have less force if she stayed close. His first blow landed on her left temple. "Who are you? What do you want?" she screamed as loudly as possible. At 5'4", Susan was 5 inches shorter than Haffey and had 2 bad knees, but she significantly outweighed her cocaine-addled attacker. When she slammed her body against his, he pushed her against her bedroom's pink walls and spoke his only words of the night: "You're strong." That phrase sent adrenaline surging through Susan and a terrible realization: he is here to kill me. I don't know why, but his intent was clear. Susan wrestled the hammer away and swung its claw 3 or 4 times into Haffey's skull, opening wounds on his head. When he snatched it back, Susan grabbed his throat. "Who sent you here?" she demanded, squeezing his airway until his face turned red, then purple, then blue. Frightened by what she was doing, Susan let go and tried to flee.
Haffey caught her in the hallway, spun her around and punched her face, splitting her lip. Susan fell to the floor, seeing an image that would haunt her forever. Haffey standing over her, with the hammer raised.
"I looked at the floor and thought, I'm going to die today," Susan later recalled. But somehow, Susan summoned strength that only emerges in near-death situations. She managed to pull Haffey to the floor with her, turning the fight into a desperate ground struggle. With no weapons available, Susan turned herself into one. She began biting Haffey everywhere she could reach: his arm, his flank, his thigh, even through his zipper to his genitals. She hoped the sudden pain would force him to drop the hammer, and if she died, that her bite marks would help police identify her killer. I was like a downed power line snapping on the pavement, Susan would later describe her desperate actions. The fight had now lasted 14 minutes, an eternity when you're fighting for your life. Both combatants were exhausted, bloody, and wedged on their sides in the hallway outside Susan's bedroom. 14 minutes of fighting for your life, can you imagine that? Susan's determination kept her alive, but she still had to finish this fight. What do you think gave her the strength to keep going? Comment below, because what happens next shows exactly what the human spirit is capable of. Susan managed to throw her left leg over Haffey's body and climb on top of him. She hooked her left arm around his neck in a chokehold, using the self-defense techniques she'd learned during her nursing training. "Tell me who sent you here and I will call you a fucking ambulance," she yelled in his face, still hoping to get information that might help police understand what had happened. Haffey said nothing. Instead, he growled like an animal, the cocaine and lack of oxygen making him incoherent. The career criminal who had been paid $50,000 to murder Susan Kuhnhausen was dead, killed by the woman he'd been hired to eliminate. After confirming Haffey was dead using her medical training, Susan grabbed the hammer and fled to her neighbor's house. With the same calm professionalism she brought to medical emergencies, she asked them to call 911.
911, what's your emergency?
We have an intruder in the house next door. The intruder was in the bedroom with a hammer. The woman who lives there thinks she may have strangled him. He was down when she left.
Can you put her on the phone?
She's bleeding.
Does she need an ambulance?
No, she's a nurse. She says call an ambulance for the guy, he may be dead.
When Portland police arrived, they found Susan sitting on her neighbor's porch, holding ice against her swollen face, completely composed despite having just killed a man in self-defense. The body is in the hallway, Susan told the officers. The weapon he used is on the floor next to him. I haven't touched anything except to check his vital signs and confirm that he was dead. Inside the house, officers found a scene of incredible violence. Susan's hallway looked like a war zone, overturned furniture, blood on the walls, clear signs of a prolonged, desperate struggle. In the center of it all lay Edward Haffey's body. The investigation moved quickly. Police found Haffey's wallet with identification, and his criminal background check immediately revealed his 1994 conviction for conspiracy to commit murder, a case with eerily similar circumstances. The next day, Susan's friend Helen accompanied her back to the house to collect belongings. That's when they made the discovery that would break the case wide open. "Susan," Helen said, "there's a backpack in your basement that doesn't belong." Inside the backpack, police found items that belonged to Haffey, a container of Hershey's syrup, $200 in cash, diabetes medication, and most importantly, a daybook with an entry for September 4th that read, "Call Mike." A manila envelope contained Mike's new cell phone number. The conspiracy was unraveling. This wasn't a random home invasion, this was a carefully planned murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by Susan's own husband. Can you imagine Susan's shock when she realized her husband of 18 years had tried to have her murdered? The betrayal had to be almost as devastating as the physical attack. What do you think hurt more, fighting for her life or learning the truth about Mike? Let me know in the comments. Mike's carefully constructed alibi crumbled under investigation. Financial records showed he'd withdrawn exactly $50,000 before the attack, money that was found in Haffey's possession. Security records proved someone had disabled Susan's home alarm while she was at work. Mike later admitted this was him. Multiple witnesses came forward, testifying that Mike had approached them about killing Susan before finding Haffey. One former cellmate of Haffey's told police that Mike had offered him $5,000 to help with what he called an insurance scam. Another witness had driven Haffey to meet Mike at an Applebee's parking lot. On September 8, just 2 days after the attack, Mike left a suicide note at his father's house. "All I ever wanted was to be loved, and every time I had it, I fucked it up." Then he fled, prompting police to issue a bulletin for his arrest. Mike's flight didn't last long. On September 13, a Clackamas County Sheriff's deputy found Mike in the parking garage of Kaiser Sunnyside Medical Center, claiming he was checking himself in for psychiatric treatment. "I have nothing to live for anymore," he told officers before his arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. During his arrest interview, Mike initially denied knowing Haffey despite employment records proving they worked together at Fantasy Adult Video. When confronted with the overwhelming evidence, he changed his story. "I didn't do it. Just because I know the guy doesn't mean I did anything." But the evidence was damning. Prosecutor Brian Davidson later said, he could deny it all he wanted, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. On August 30, 2007, faced with insurmountable evidence, Mike Kuhnhausen pleaded guilty to soliciting Susan's murder. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Mike was supposed to be released on September 14, 2014. Susan, who had filed for divorce the day after Mike's arrest, prepared herself for his return to society. She had moved to a new home on an out-of-the-way cul-de-sac, surrounded her house with gravel so she could hear footsteps, and practiced shooting at a nearby range. "If he came here, he was not going to get close enough to hurt me," Susan said. But Mike wouldn't live long enough to try. On Friday the 13th in June 2014, cancer killed Mike Kuhnhausen in prison, just 92 days before his scheduled release. Jailhouse letters revealed that Mike never acknowledged his guilt. He claimed he'd pleaded to the crime only to escape a possibly longer sentence. He continued to believe he was the true victim until the day he died. Mike got 10 years for trying to have his wife murdered, but died in prison before completing his sentence. He never admitted guilt or showed remorse. Do you think that's adequate justice? Susan had to live with the trauma while Mike played the victim until he died. What do you think real justice looks like in a case like this? I'll be reading every comment. Susan returned to work at Providence Medical Center, where she continued saving lives until her retirement in December 2014. Her colleagues called her a hero, but Susan initially struggled with that label. "They're not calling you a hero because you killed a man," her supervisor explained. "They're calling you a hero because they want to believe, given the same circumstances, they, too, might survive." The trauma of that September night changed Susan forever. "I'm doing a life sentence for picking a bad husband," she said. She felt like a broken plate glued back together, always sitting in restaurants where she could see the door, switching driving routes, and circling the block if she thought someone might be following her. Susan survived because she refused to give up. But how many people are out there right now, living with someone who's secretly planning their death? If you think survivors like Susan deserve to have their stories heard, then prove it. Hit that subscribe button, not for me, but for every person fighting their own nightmare who needs to know that survival is possible. Susan chose life over death. The least you can do is choose subscribe. Honor the survivors. Subscribe to Crime Echoes for more engaging crime stories.